The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Very good evening to all the participants, my colleague, and a very warm welcome to Dr. Rajdeep. I also, this is in extension of the JSIA webinar series 2020, and the topic of today's webinar is COVID-19 as a lens to decode Chinese governance system, and this will be presented by Dr. Rajdeep. Professor Rajdeep is an associate professor and assistant director, Center for Global Governance and Policy. And as the format goes, we would be taking question answers, and I could see some of the questions are already there. So we will take those questions after his presentation. I now request Dr. Rajdeep to start with his presentation, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ridhiman. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to this particular lecture. And as everyone is concerned with the specific topic or the phenomena of the COVID, I thought we can take a look at the current crisis and then use it as a lens to decode the Chinese governance system. And when I say the Chinese governance system, I specifically mean to take a look at the politics and also take a look at the society within China. And the purpose of taking a look at this is that if we are able to comprehend better the response of the Chinese society and also the government, we can also be able to comprehend as to how China is going to behave. We will also be able to understand its motivations for acting in certain way or not acting, for that matter. And as far as the context goes for international relations students, one of the insights we already have when pursuing international affairs is with that the domestic politics are going to have an impact on a particular country's international politics. Previously, the study of international relations has focused more on at the level of interaction among states. But by 1970s and into early 1980s, the scholarship realized that the domestic politics, the manner in which events are debated, discussed, decisions are taken within a country, are also going to have significant impact on how that country engages with other countries. So as a student of international relations, we need to understand the political science of a particular country to understand the international relations of that country. So here, by looking at the COVID-19, I am going to try to share with you a few of the insights that I could gather after observing China's response to meet the challenge, so to say. My purpose is not necessarily to just critique China for the things that they might have done wrong, but my purpose of this presentation is to shed light on trying to understand the Chinese political system in a way, so we can better comprehend their actions, and we can, in a way, understand Chinese political system, and also try to assess as to where they might be going in the future. So the first point that I'm going to is in the presentation is to give you a little bit overview of China and the COVID crisis. Okay, and this is to just set some background, and in one of the specific purposes that I also want to point out is the scale of the crisis. I want to highlight here, and then I'm going to address some specific questions with regarding to how the responses that were taken by China reveal the nature of its politics. Okay, So these are two things that I'll try to cover in the presentation. So the first point that I want to make here is on the point about human flows. Uh, uh, Simply put, in 2006, 2003, when there was the SARS crisis, the nature of the human flows in the world in general and in China is not at the was very small compared to the human flows today. Um, so to give you a kind of a context here, here if you were to take a look at the movement of people in China, year on year, there it's been kind of growing in terms of the sheer numbers. The number here is 6.1 billion domestic trips undertaken in China by people, and I hope you can able to get sense of the number of people who are moving. On the other hand, if you were to take a look at people coming or going to visit China, it's again a humongous number, 145 million. That translates to 14 crores, in our Indian kind of counting system. So today, world is really, really tied in both ways. I do not. The comparable figure for Chinese uh, who are visiting abroad is a little bit dated. So in 2018, it has been shared that over 110 million Chinese travel outside mainland China. Now, out of those 110, 50 to 60 million people were predominantly travelers in Southeast Asia. So countries like Malaysia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Indonesia, within that region. But the rest of them have been traveling around the world. So based on the human flows, in early February, there was an assessment done by scholars who created what is, and did some modeling to see as to what was the potential for the infection to be transmitted outside China. And they created this infectious disease vulnerability index, which is given here in terms of the number of passenger volume. So it is 60,000 to 150,000 or so. The dots show that in these maps, and they have given a score based on the coloring system to get a sense that there was a high probability of infections. And this particular chart here, which is magnified now, shows all those cities around the world which would have attracted or potential visitors from China of over 1 lakh, 100,000 people would have traveled to these cities. Estimates, these are estimates based on earlier data and also some of the updated data on international air travel. And if you were to see, like I said, there is a significant concentration of Chinese travelers in their immediate neighborhood of Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, Singapore, and all other countries. And if you were to expand it a little bit in the Europe, again, you see some of these countries like Moscow, Frankfurt, Amsterdam in there. And you also see Milan, being attracting some significant number of people, and London. And we all now know that the spread was very significant. And if you were to map in North America, again, New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco here on the West Coast, again, had a significant volume of people traveling. So today, the main point that I want to make here is the volume of people that is being able to travel abroad is really increased. You saw the figure about the domestic travel, and you also see the figure about international travel. And what it suggests essentially is that the capacity of Chinese citizens as consumers is really grown. So in that sense, it suggests very clearly the economic potential of many of these individual Chinese citizens. And it has an impact to understand China. That is, in the from early 2000s to say middle of 2015 or so, China's economy was dependent on looking or dependent on consumers from around the world. But today, the spending capacity and the economic capacity of all of these of their own citizens is increased. And if today China were to pursue an economic growth plan, they can easily or potentially look at their own people as customers, and that is something worth noting. So for the global context, we are very closely tied. I think that's very well known. But today, the Chinese consumer or a Chinese citizen is really has a great economic potential, and I think that is something we all should note, because so that's a first point that I wanted to highlight about China by looking at the flows of the people. Coming to the second point that I want to make here is captured in this particular heading that I've given, which is Chinese political system can be understood as one which has centralized systems, but these centralized systems are determined by, or rather are affected by provincial responses, provincial or state responses, so to say, like our Indian states. And this COVID pandemic has clearly shed light on this. One of the important things that is we need to pay attention is after the SARS crisis in 2003 and increased Chinese capacity and also consciousness about contagious diseases, the Chinese government has put in a place of what is called as the Contagious Disease National Direct Reporting System, which is a reporting system that is connected to the hospitals down to to the lowest level in the country. So it's both provincial and also it is connected to the county, city, and other levels. So if doctors notice any disease with pathology which cannot be understood or explained well, they are supposed and not supposed, they are required to directly report, and this information is fed into the to the control system in Beijing. So at the central level, they can observe in real time if reports come in, and they can make the connections. Say if they see a cluster of in any county showing some of these unexplained diseases, they can immediately take action. And but the point is about the COVID crisis, and what it has shown is that the action, so to say, or for the centralized system happens at the provincial level. So here, the politics, the local practices, the local interests, all of them come to play a role in reporting about this. Here I have some information a little bit in terms of, this is a story from the New York Times, where they have reported that if only the National Direct Reporting System was activated right away when the earliest cases were being detected, and containment measures were put in place, they would have, there would have been lesser chances. Every week would have helped in contributing to. That is, every week when the shutdown would have happened sooner, would have prevented the spread. Alas, that hasn't been the case. But the point that I want to make here is, even with increased centralized systems and capacity of China in general, the provincial responses, that is the actions taken by a provincial government, are going to determine. And so if we were to focus on China, of course, we need to take a look at it in terms of the aggregate, but we also need to pay attention to individual provinces, and that is, not just for how the provinces respond to the pandemic, but for any other matters. If you're interested in trying to see how the Chinese government is taking steps to mitigate climate change, of course, you take a look at the centralized, planning and whatnot, but also we have to pay attention to the provincial responses. If you're interested in how, say, the public health provision is there, you need to take a look at the centralized policies and other guidelines, allocation of funds, but you still have to pay attention to the individual provincial responses to really understand what is the effect or not of, say, that health policies. So this is a point that I want to make here. And I'm going to illustrate this through the actions of the provincial government in China, specifically in Wuhan and in Wuhan, which is the city there, and also the Hubei province where it is located. I'll shed some light on how they were responding and what it can tell us. So, one of the things that we noticed is that this particular point about centralized systems but action at the provincial level meant that the provincial governments were acting as if business was normal, so to say. And one of the important thing that we could focus on is the various political events that happen in at the provincial level. And here is some information about four events that were held between early, so January 6th to around 17th or so, right? And you all might know around 20th, January 20th, I think, so to say, the world was alerted, and afterwards on Jan 23, Wuhan and Hubei province was completely shut down. But here is an event which is of the what is called as the Wuhan People's Congress, which is the elected body of the city of Wuhan, and also the plenum meeting of the Wuhan, the local Chinese Communist Party's meeting. And here you see a large number of delegates were gathering in big arenas in January 6 to 10. And I will, make a point in a few minutes that the provincial and also the city level government were aware about some the danger of this particular disease, but they still went ahead and conducted the events. And so this is the city level or the Wuhan meetings, and this is of the provincial, the Hubei Provincial Communist Party's meeting and the Hubei Provincial People's Congress, which is the elected body. And you see large numbers were gathering. And the two sessions, these are called as the two sessions, because the session of the People's Congress and also of the Communist Party are held simultaneously to address. And these two sessions meetings are important because in March, the two sessions meeting would have been held according to normal calendar at the national level in Beijing. But the provincial governments are many a time in a bind because the dilemma was whether to hold it or not. So if they held the meeting, they were essentially hiding information about the contagious disease and risking them. But if they were to not hold the meeting, that is going to be a bigger problem for them because that will essentially show that there is some real danger out there. And that is something the provincial governments do not like to communicate to the central government because provincial leaders are bound to the centralized system and they cannot be bearers of bad news, simply put. So that's the flip side of authoritarian government, because everyone will be, say, doing the yes man, yes sir kind of thing, and they will not, share their bad news. And that is something, which clearly comes out here in China. So I'm going to show a few things to illustrate as to what was happening here. So here is an image of I mapped out through the Baidu map, which is the Chinese equivalent of Google Maps. The location, where they were meeting, it's called the Wuhan Theater, is a few kilometers, 6 kilometers away from the Huanan seafood market, where this crisis was supposed to originate. Again, I'm not an expert to say where exactly, but this is a well-reported one, which suggests they would were in a relatively close area. Proximity means, again, say the delegates would have had to be fed, whatnot, right? And the Chinese spring festivals, meetings and others are very huge on food. So possibly some of the food would have come from there. That's a thing that I'm hinting at. So here is something I want to illustrate a little bit further about this provincial, reporting of politics and whatnot. So this is the Hubei Daily newspaper from January 10th, which is, and these are some of the headlines that I've translated. This is the headline talking about focus on education at the provincial meeting. Another one talking about Hubei Provincial Committee of the Communist Party of China held a democratic consultation meeting, as you can see. Another story here through pictures, which is they pointed out about the Fuxing high-speed train. This is the high-speed trains that they are really today. I think they have over 22 or 25,000 kilometers of high-speed train, and they were pointing out to the new train coming to Wuhan, one of the newer trains being launched, and as to how it is going to. The further detail here tells that it is going to help the people to visit home during the Spring Festival that was around that time. So these are a few more stories. So this is January 20th, when there was a little bit more. Here again, this is again reportage about the provincial Congress meetings and the achievements and whatnot. And here is a story again of the trains and other things as to how people are coming back home. And this Chinese Spring Festival, which was in the holidays were coming around that time, late mid-January to late January, would see close to 700 million people traveling back home in a way, and that is something they were pointing out that they were prepared. And here is the newspaper from January 23rd, when they started in a way acting. And so here they report about the what we call as the hospitals, and that they have set up a team to start addressing this. And this is the one with the January 24th, when the order to shut down happened. And here, if you see still, the dominance here is the story. I think you can clearly see the color and whatnot, font. This is the address of President Xi Jinping on the occasion of the Spring Festival, which he had given at the State Council meeting in Beijing. So full text is published here. Then these are the various other news stories about implementing the lockdown. So a letter to the people of the province, photo images of closure of highways and some hospital scenes. So the directive. So the point that I'm repeating here is, as much as it's an authoritarian or centralized system, and I think it's less useful to just call it authoritarian, but it's a centralized system. Decisions and implementation is at the provincial level, and this we see this dilemma sometimes. So the third point that I want to make here is about the capacity of the Chinese state, and this is the title of an article written published by some scholars at the University of Toronto, who titled it "Censoring Contagion." And I think many of you might know or heard about, if you're following the Chinese politics, of Dr. Li Wenliang, who was disciplined for sharing news in end of December, and disciplined on January 2. And he later on contracted COVID and passed away in early February. And he was is viewed as a whistleblower. You might know, so I did not belabor the adding more. But what I wanted to highlight here a little bit more is the is the censorship that is carried out by the Chinese state, and it also reveals the capacity of the Chinese state, and that is something I want you to pay attention. So here is excuse me, I think the order I had to go. So here is a research scholars who have uncovered. This is information about a app in China called YY, or it's sometimes referred to as EE. And this is a live streaming app. And the interesting thing about this app is that the updates on the app come along with the words or keywords that need to be censored if anyone is using or commenting in the while using the live streaming app. And so here are these specific words that the scholars have uncovered, which is if anyone were to report or refer to unknown Wuhan pneumonia, this would have been censored. And this particular keyword was added on December 31, 2019. Now you see, this is end of 2019 that, and this censorship happens based on directives by government, local and national. And so here it appears, this hints that someone in the Hubei provincial government were concerned and they were already undertaking measures to censor. So similarly, the reference to Wuhan seafood market, SARS variation, SARS outbreak in Wuhan, Wuhan Health Committee, and this is the lab that China has in Wuhan, which is a military medical lab. Any references to that were screened starting to December 31, 2019. And I think you see that that there is something hidden that was going on in a way. Similarly, WeChat is another very popular app that people use for almost everything. Then what they found, these are different kinds of keyword combinations that were starting to be screened. Now, one of the things is these could be, so to say, detected only in early February. You can see the dates, 4th, 5th, 12th, and others, where again, muckraking Wuhan virus lab, successful history of lab director, local authorities, epidemic, central government, cover up, such kind of Wuhan plus CCP plus crisis plus Beijing. So if this particular set of combination appears in a message in the larger body of the text, that message is going to be screened. That means it will not be delivered to the intended person. So it's like you might send a message on WhatsApp, but the algorithm reads, and if you say anything like this, it screens, and your recipient never gets that message. So it's that's the kind of effect. Now, what the scholars found out is there are two kinds of these censorship that were happening. One is called as the client-side censorship. By this, it means that your app is updated periodically, and the app on your phone contains the keywords which needs to be censored. So, and that is what they found in YY, which helped them to, in a way, reverse engineer and uncover when the date was added. On the other hand, WeChat, what it does is, as a user, you send a message, it goes to the server in the cloud, and then the server checks the messages for blacklist keywords, and then if anything is found, then the message is not sent to the intended user. So here I want to really emphasize that the Chinese state's capacity in censorship is really immense, and that is something we need to pay attention to and understand if you want to understand Chinese politics. This is on the one. You can see further another slide about censorship. Again, immediately after the death of Dr. Li Wenliang, any references to epidemic color revolution. Now, this is something about color revolution is referred to those democratic mobilization that happened in Georgia and elsewhere a while ago, or any reference to people-to-people transmission that he had highlighted. Dr. Li Wenliang had highlighted about people-to-people transmission. and he voiced would be screened. Any reference to the context of Li Wenliang and hinting at the central government would be screened, and in this way. So these are different ways in which censorship is happening, and it is all over the place, and that is something we need to understand. And that has a relevance to the next point that I want to make, is about big data, but I'll come to that. So far, in a way, it appears, my analysis has focused more on, you can say, a little bit more on the darker side, or on the more concerning side of the Chinese government and governance system. But these capacities are actually critical in also, that is, the centralized systems are also critical to ensure that directives are implemented. So the first point I want to make here is, once the lockdown was imposed on January 23rd, the Chinese state was able to enforce the lockdown. There was no gaps, through which people were escaping, so to say. They were really effective in enforcing, and because they have the capacity. A second point that I really want to highlight here is that after the lockdown, they were able to actually provide for people amidst the lockdown. So the state capacity to deliver, all these various online platforms that they have, which can, like Amazon and Flipkart or others, they were able to ensure that they would deliver. But apart from these commercial platforms, they also have this very dense network of neighborhood committees who took steps to ensure that people say, like you can think of like the resident welfare associations that we might have in India, but these neighborhood watch associations and others are really powerful. If you don't follow the instructions given by them, you can expect the police to visit your home. But they are also effective in ensuring that single people were, provided food. People in need were, say, if someone was unwell, they could be moved to hospital and whatnot. Of course, you might have read stories that there were some brutalizing aspects and whatnot, but that is, I think that's not actually the main point that I want to make here. Like the way in India also, we see a lot of brutalizing pictures, but that's not the whole story. So, but here they really have been able to provide. So, for example, the previous, not how to say, in the last 10 years or so, most of the major cities have created a kind of a reservoir of croplands in the close vicinity of that city, which will provide them with fresh vegetables to those cities. So, even though the country is vast, they needed to depend on the vast supply chain for essentials, including fresh food. They could draw on these, and that is something worth noting. Another point about the whole response is how they were able to mobilize the state capacity, especially through state-owned enterprises. That's a word that's often referred to in China, but you can think of them as like public sector undertakings here in India. And once the centralized system decided to mobilize and enforce the lockdown, uh, from around the country, here is an example. Some 217 medical teams with more than 42,000 medical personnel were dispatched to not just people, along with equipment and supplies. And I think we this is important, and I'm like only talking about one state and one province. So this is something they could do, and I'll give you a few more examples of this state capacity in a minute. Fourth point under this section I want to say is that the Chinese Communist Party played a central role through the personal leadership of President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang. And this included visits by the Premier into to Wuhan initially, and later on President Xi Jinping also visited Wuhan. Which suggests that they were really grappled with the matter And that is some, to compare and contrast, that is not something we have observed here in India during the lockdown of personal, political leadership. Apart from speeches, I have not seen um, anything where which would spur a local administration or whatever. If say our prime minister was visiting or our president, but I do not want to just necessarily critique, but that I here what a point I want to make is the central leadership has really taken over the command and control, and because they will be ultimately answerable. And the fifth point here I want to suggest is also as to how the manufacturing capability of China today helped in retrofitting factories to manufacture masks and ventilators, which were very critical. And that has happened, in a wide scale. That from a personal kind of thing, also, I wanted to make a point, which is my sister-in-law is Chinese, as in my brother-in-law is married to her, and they are still in China amidst this lockdown. But and initially in January and into early February, they were really trying hard to buy masks and ventilators from here in India, and we were trying to source, some companies and others. But by early February, for like I think around 10th of February, there was no need for any outside supply because they were able to change and retrofit their markets and others to start manufacturing these essentials and really like alter move away from external need. Um, Here are a few things that I want to highlight, in terms of capacity. Uh, this is a report from yesterday, wherein they pointed out as to how in Wuhan they have conducted over 6.57 million tests, that is 65 lakhs in 10 days, or 14 lakhs just on Saturday last. And India, as of yesterday, conducted so far 31 lakh tests. This is one province I'm talking about in the recent past, and this is India after 60 plus days. I think you can see the scale and the capacity that they have. Here is an example of a Chinese company called BYD, which is an electric vehicle manufacturer, batteries, who changed over to start manufacturing masks and other essential items. I had some other comments here, but I'll skip this. A final point that I want to make here is about the capability and the Chinese use of big data. Simply put, the China is today a pioneer in 5G, and the population is connected to real name system in the mobile phones. So by if you have information of a specific number, you have information of that particular person. Simply put. So this big data helped them to enable to track COVID patients. And the centralized system helped in creating a map of, these are all the maps of the provinces. And this is a map of Wuhan province, where the red color shows the infected people, green of the people who have recovered, and red who died. And that really, is something that they were able to leverage. And this is an individual data point of a particular person, and I'll explain that in a minute. So the person started, here, so in the bottom, started in Wuhan. And so what we see is that's a travel route of a confirmed patient. So the patient left Wuhan on January 21 on the high-speed rail, then changing trains and went to another place until the 24th. Then he realized he had symptoms but he continued his journey. On 27th, he was on the move again, and on the 30th, the next place, and only on the 31st, he was diagnosed with the virus. So based on this patient's travel route, we can know where he has been. So today, they are really able to mix and match the data to leverage their responses. And I had more information, but they have, because of the centralized nature of the government system, all these departments, health, transport, information technology department, are all able to share, and they all contribute the data. So by analysis, we can, by bring essentially fusing, fusion of related data can generate really valuable results. So today, I think by looking at the COVID crisis, we are able to understand a little bit better on the capacity of the state, capacity of the Chinese Communist Party, And if as we go and as if you're observing events from China, I hope you can keep some of these points in mind to try to understand the responses of China. Okay. So as I would have liked to, with the further other points that I have to want to just flag, and I'll leave it, which is one, the rural-urban divide, and that's a big topic in China because it's not all hunky-dory that it's all like one uniform system. Another thing is, again, like I said earlier, is the provincial responses after the lockdown. So initially they were not doing some much. Then they really central government has taken steps to tackle it. But afterwards, again, the central government has to pass the responsibility to the provinces to open up businesses, to open up schools and whatnot. So again, we need to still go back and focus there. And of course, the potential international impact, that I do not have time to cover here. So one last point that I want to make before I take questions is, there is a diversity of information now. Many of you might not have a chance to have not skill to read Chinese, and I'm still learning, and it's a really tedious one and challenging one. But there are today a lot of groups, scholars who are putting together original material, detailed material, which can help us to on commentary on different aspects of China, like the China Media Project. Sub China is like what's up, China, Sinocism, Sixth Stone. This is another interesting blog. China Power, China File, and others. So if you're interested, you could take a look at some of these platforms to follow to gather more, learn more about China. So I'll stop the presentation here and we'll take some questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Rajdeep. It was very informative and I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. Okay. I'm sure our participants have also taken some of the information from the presentation.
Okay.
We have around 17 minutes to take question answers.
Yes.
I would request you, if you could take a look at the questions, yes, and if you can club your questions and then answer, we can cover as many as possible.
Okay, so just give me a minute to take a look at the questions, please. I was engrossed in my presentation, so so there is a question about the US. Is it? Okay, I think So again, so for example, a question from Arshia and a question from Raymond Baka. So I think many of course, you are concerned with the global implications and whatnot, and see, one of the things that we scholars, as much as we can gather information and assess, is try and so if concerned about say if China were to be behind it. I am really skeptical, about this because we try to source, if you get any information, we try to also take a look at it from different angles. So I think if you're thinking about, the US criticizing that this was caused by China, for me, it's very hard to find a convincing, or rather find convincing, gather convincing evidence to say that this is somehow the handiwork of the Chinese government. It could potentially be an accident. So until and unless we there is investigation or something like that, if both we have, medical scientists have to really understand the virus and also tie to a particular lab. Until that is, there to cast aspersions on China or that they are willing, I think it's a little bit less useful. Think of it another way. What is in it for China? that they are going to dominate the world and whatnot. What it's so for example, China, assuming for a minute that China had unleashed this virus on people, and they wanted to infect Indians, Americans, Europeans, and whatnot. uh, you know, in January, look at the timeline. January 23rd, the Chinese imposed a lockdown saying that the disease is really bad. Now, do you think, that other countries would not have noticed a lockdown? And if other countries felt the same sense of, severity and whatnot, that they will not take the steps. So other countries started taking, steps from screening and whatnot. Now, to assuming that China's target was the United States, there are too many variables in this whole thing. Of US is a large country, complex political system, and even the best and the brightest and whatnot of the Chinese Communist Party coming together, I doubt can anticipate the way in which things go in the mind of Trump and things like that. So it's a far-fetched point about putting blame on China. Um, what I think I find a little bit more convincing, is this is what I've presented here. That is, it is definitely a centralized system or whatnot, but the missteps, the misactions, and whatnot at the local level are increased because initially, even among the doctors and all, they did not have this comprehension, one, about the severity of this human to human transmission. They were still focusing on other vectors infecting people, so they were like looking. Second thing is that is we that was visible only in early in mid February or like later, is that we now know that the people who were infected could be asymptomatic, but spread the disease. This is not information that the Chinese knew or the world knew until into middle of February or later than that. So I think I don't believe in all of these. So it's a lot of missteps, which China is now trying to address. That is yes, we failed initially, but now um, we have tackled, and that is an argument they are going to highlight to their domestic audience and to the world. So that is one. Um, the, so let me see on some questions on. I'll try to address questions which are closer to this COVID and Chinese governance system than this Hong Kong and whatnot. I'll depending on the time. So let me address the first one.
Professor, can you stop the screen sharing, please?
I'm sorry?
The screen sharing, can you just stop it?
Okay, so just so it is in.
So it's in the control panel.
Yes.
There's an option called as sharing. You open that.
Okay, sure. Okay, so now only my image will be shown, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so thank you. A question I think which people are pointing out about the information or the nature of information about China and the information that is coming out of China. True, being an authoritarian and a closed system, it is very hard to understand the credibility and the veracity of the data. And so we should approach it with skepticism. I think if you just damn them and say we are not going to use or things like that, I think it's less useful. But one of the things again, go about data and about the evolving response in China was that initially, there were not many testing kits, so they had to start making testing kits and whatnot using what they either detecting the RNA or DNA. But they were in Wuhan. The doctors also realized that they could, to address this aggressively. They even used data based on scans of the chest, heart and lungs of the people. So, which in some ways, if you are an epidemiologist, trying can be less helpful because you're mixing different kinds of data. So it's like mixing information about apples and oranges, so to say, as you know. So the quality of data, and so it shows a rapidly evolving disease and also rapidly evolving response. So quality of data does suffer, and that is suffering even in the US at the moment. The data has been mixed in the US until recently, where they were mixing information of tests of both of those who were infected, and follow-up tests done about those who were infected were also put in the same category as tests. So many epidemiologists were interpreting the data saying that, oh, that means every test was viewed as a new or a test on a new person, when in fact there were some tests we know which were on the same person who was infected. Then after some time they wanted to test whether the person is still positive, and follow up kind of thing. So data quality, of course, it's almost like war, conflict, and data quality did suffer. A question, I think, by Mr. Nikhil Sapra said, even if it's an accident, should the international community hold China accountable? I think see, there are two aspects about accountable. One is this maliciousness. If say it is, if you were driving a car and say your car tire bursts and you swerve, and then you hit a pedestrian. It's you cannot be held responsible for the death of that person as if it's a murder. So there are these conditions where you can justify that. I'm driving, so you could be charged with, say, what you call unintentional homicide, or unintentional manslaughter, but that is, as you can see, unintentional. So, but you can be charged a little bit severe by saying, say, if you're driving over the speed. So then you can say, oh, you're being negligent, and so accountability emerges from all of this. So to pin the responsibility on China, other countries. The second thing is maliciousness. So assuming this is China, that it has created a virus, unleashed on the world, and all of that, I think it's almost impossible to hold China accountable. But yes, it does suffer through reputation. So the lingering effects are going to persist for quite some time of the effects. So a student, Abhijit Nair, as a person, has asked whether I could elaborate on more on the 5G implications of China. I think you're referring to the point about how US and US especially, and a few other countries have expressed concern about 5G technology, and the Huawei company, which is at the middle of it. Yes, it is going to further, the distrust is going to affect the business, and US is taking or tightening the regulations to ensure that suppliers, say from Taiwan or elsewhere, are who have minority stake from, say, US investment, also do not sell to Huawei. So I think this pandemic has only deepened mistrust among countries about China, and that's something it's going to play out, which is. But then there are countries like the UK, which is still engaging with Huawei. So it's up, and we have to wait and watch. On the question about, I think so I'm trying to see. Someone, Raymond again asked whether another question on state of war in South Asia after Japan transfers all businesses from China to Indonesia and India. I'm not so sure what you're meaning, but I'll try to comment more on questions pertaining to China. And so I think a question on I think on Hong Kong. I hope Mr. Abhishek's question is also addressed. based on the point about the deepening mistrust. So um, uh, how I think this is a question I think it's interesting. Arshia Suhag has raised on how can India use the criticism of Chinese response to pandemic for image building and diplomatic gains on various global fora. It can be used, but I think uh, the I am a big skeptic of comparing India and China. Apart from the population, I think and maybe calling ourselves civilizations and whatnot. There is, and people being similar or whatnot. We are too divergent. Like so, if you want to use metrics about GDP, it's like we are dwarfed by China. You want to use metrics about, say, their human capital. It's another, the ball game. We want to use, so in different ways, especially on the material and other capabilities, India is way, way, way behind China. So if we are concerned about trying to contribute, India, my advice or suggestion or strategy would be not to pitch ourselves as against China. And this has been something Indian government has been adhering to, and I think that is a path we should follow. That is, if we engage with other countries, we should engage with the various aspects or the way we look at ourselves. That is, we are a democratic country. That is, we are a multi-ethnic country, multi-linguistic country. We are a developing country. We are concerned about a agrarian economy. I think all of these things we should share with other countries who might have this. So if someone else views themselves as a democratic country, we can share the things that we can, so rather than pitching ourselves as against, as an alternate vision, because if you want to project, especially through like a soft power, I think we can only do that by doing, so to say, or by ourselves being good and responsible, countries in how we deal with our people. So we shouldn't, I think we should be less worried about looking at China, and we should be focusing more on what we can do, what are the various steps we have tried to take here, what are functioning, what are our failures, and how are we respond to the failures. And sadly, I think the migrant crisis might just become one of the kind of a very an image associated with India's response to the COVID crisis. So we have to really address all of these before we think about image building and whatnot. If we take care of our own domestic needs and other things, others will look at us just because we are a large country. And again, this goes back to the initial point that I made about countries having to take a look at take care of the domestic politics. They are important. They are the key. And if you're sound on that, then things will be all right on the international fora also. I think an interesting question by Mr. Sudarshan, whether it's the right time to contemplate about the shortcomings of the democratic regimes, especially when it comes to capacity of democratic states to mobilize resources during a crisis like this. I don't think so, because what I shared, definitely, that because of the centralized system, they were able to mobilize and whatnot. But if you pay attention, in India, the it's not just about question, capacity, whether you have adequate number of beds or whatnot. It is whether we have the social capital, so to say, of people responding to those who need help. And here I feel there has actually been tremendous response by people from all walks of life to mitigate. But trying to facilitate the transport of migrants across borders, that is not something ordinary people can do. It is the state which has to do. And in India, it is not a question of our state's capacity. It is a question of our ruling party's willingness, and I think they have failed there. There's no doubt about that. But so it is not a shortcoming of the democratic system. It's a shortcoming of the ruling party which has been elected. So I think we shouldn't confuse systemic aspects to individual responses. So I think I try to address as many questions as I could, and I think our time's up. So if, I'll pass the message control to the administrator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rajdeep. Indeed, it was a very informative presentation, and some of the questions were also very unique, and I think we have addressed to most of the questions that were put up in the session today.
Sure.
We hope to come back to our participants with similar topics on webinars, and we look forward to your participation ahead. For today, we like to thank you for joining in, and once again, thank you, Professor Rajdeep, for sparing time out of your busy schedule with online classes and other important work. So, but we thoroughly enjoyed your session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for providing the opportunity, and I hope it shed some light on for all of you to take a look at China.
Thank you. Would you like to suggest, before we just end the session, would you like to suggest any readings for students
sure,
who are interested to know more about?
I think one of the is there a space where I can type or view?
Yeah, in the chat option you can just mention.
Chat option. So if I
just below
yes,
questions.
Yes. Okay, so I think okay, I'll just do that in a minute. So a book called China Questions is a book that is very useful. Another book called To Govern China. This is a really insightful book that I would I highly recommend. It's a book that I've also reviewed, but it's been truly informative for me. These are a couple of books that I can find. I am sharing. I've been posting a few books that I'm reading on. I will just copy and paste that. That thread. You could possibly. Who is interested could possibly take a look at that thread as I continue to add, which include, of course, so here is a Twitter thread where I will continue to add a few books about the books that I'm reading about China currently and which are very useful. So I hope that you can use any of these resources. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.